Today on our podcast, our guest is Alexander Melton, CEO and founder of Wyrmix, which is a creative technology engineering studio based out of Dallas, Texas, that leverages their relationships and partnerships to create physical and digital products, connected experiences, and interactive environments. Welcome to the LA Business Podcast, your destination to hear stories of how businesses grow and scale. I'm Robert Brill, CEO of Brill Media and the host of this podcast. Now, let's jump right into this week's interview. So, Alexander, very cool. Do you go by Alex or Alexander?
Alex is a little more better, I think.
Okay, Alex. So is this your firm?
Yes, I founded it about 4 years ago.
Nice. How do you get? So, what do you guys actually do, and how did you get to starting this firm?
What you do is the million-dollar question, right? So we build interactive experiences in physical spaces, right? And so what does that mean? I'll give you an example. Have you ever used the Target app?
God, this is gonna sound horrible. My wife has.
Okay, no, that's perfect, right? That's the ideal demographic, right? So our firm, we worked with Target to actually build a segment of their app that enables the ability to find products in store, right? So
Really?
whenever you go into a store, the app will know which store you're in, and if you're looking for a specific product, it'll say like, "Hey, it's in this aisle right here, right there," right? That's a really basic example. So whenever I'm thinking like merging the physical and digital worlds, we're talking about stuff like that, right? A
Mhm.
more interesting example, we worked with Nike a while back to actually build a sculpture of a Nike Air Force One, where we projection
Mhm.
mapped onto it in at one of their conferences. And then we had an app where there was a 3D model of the shoe you could draw digital graffiti on, and it would appear on the giant shoe in real time. So it's all about breaking down the barriers between digital and physical worlds, either in the more mundane, like retail sense, or like the day-to-day interactions, or in these more fantastical senses. But it's all sort of in that same vein, right?
So that's really interesting. So are you do you consider yourself a marketing firm?
Marketing firms are our best friends. So
Right.
we are an engineering firm that solves marketing problems, right?
Got it.
So every time that you're building a product or you're doing some sort of engineering initiative, um, there's always an opportunity to leverage whatever you're already investing in to also solve marketing problems. And I'll give you a great example.
Mhm.
We were actually working with the Nickelodeon universe in the Mall of America to build out their ticketing kiosks, right? So they had a couple of different options they could have gone. They could have either bought some, off the shelf kiosks that they could have white labeled, shipped them in from China, put their logo on them, and then call it good, right? But they chose not to do that. They chose to have a completely customized kiosk from the ground up that had interactive games that were played between the different kiosk locations, that lit up and had like interactive like elements that played into the park's theme. And so why did they do that, right? When we're talking about from a functional perspective, both the white labeled version and this bespoke version, they sold tickets just as well, right? They were able to, at the end of the day, provide the same sort of like functional experience in terms of what they were intended on doing.
Sure.
The big differentiator there was one of them was an interesting enough experience that encouraged people to not just interact with it, but promote it as well, right?
Right.
So it's what we call like a brand rallying cry, right? Where someone will love the experience so much that they'll take a picture with it, they'll post it on social media, they'll tell their friends, they'll tell their friends' friends, they'll tell their dog. That's what you want to be building, right? You don't want to be building something that just does a function. You want to build something that people can brag about, right?
Right. Do you also use the phrase surprise and delight? And that seems like it would be applicable here.
Yeah, exactly. Surprise and delight.
So, so brands or marketing companies or experiential marketing companies will come to you and say, "Look, we have this idea, or we want to collaborate on ideation with you.
Mhm.
But by the way, we don't know how to build it because it's just way out of our wheelhouse." So they'll go
Mhm.
to you and say, "Let's like figure this out." And you have the technical challenge, the engineering challenge of actually building something that is functional and awesome.
Bingo, you nailed it. So,
Nice.
and it's a very much a two-way street, right? So,
Mhm.
a lot of the creative directors and people at these advertising and marketing firms, whose whole job it is to come up with these crazy ideas that bring people in that really wow audiences. they need to know what's possible from a technical perspective. And a lot of them don't come from an engineering background. A lot of them don't
Mhm.
even know, like, oh, hey, did you know you could do this thing with projection mapping, Nike shoe, real-time streaming, that sort of thing. These are very like in the weeds concepts that you have to boil down in a way that people can understand. And so that way they can leverage that in future ideas and future projects that come up.
What
So,
so what
um,
type Go ahead, sorry.
no, I was just gonna say, those are the best conversations we like to have with the creative director types, right? Is so most of our conversations with our podcast, for example, is all about bringing the creative people on and then just making them aware that these pieces of technology exist and like just let them go crazy with their ideas. Because if they come up with something clever, they're going to bring us in to build it, right?
Okay, interesting. What types of people do you have to employ to make this business work?
Um, you really need engineers and designers who understand each other, right? And by that I
Mm,
mean the best creative technologist is going to be someone who um, is an engineer with a creative background or a
mhm,
creative with an engineering background, right?
mhm,
So you'll often see, at least in the industry, a lot of creative people will be like, "Oh, I don't touch code. I don't touch soldering irons. I don't touch, hardware or any of that. I just want to make art. I just want to design. I just want to,
mhm,
be creative, right?"
mhm,
Same with the engineers. It's like I don't want to think about the actual design of it. Just tell me what to build, and I'm going to build it. Um, you really need people who are both left brain and right brain kind of thinking, right? Because what we find is that as a creative technologist, as you're going in and you're building some of this stuff, right? The creative director will outline about 80% of what actually needs to be built, and then you'll figure out that last 20% during execution. And you need a team of people who can build out that last 20% by understanding the vision of the creative.
mhm.
And that last 20%, if that's missing, that's what people notice, you know?
Right. And so, like, how do you get the word out about your business? Like, I certainly understand the podcast is one business development tool in your arsenal. Tell us about kind of like the sweet spots for you guys, like the thing that's important for many marketers. Let me just slight preamble here: predictable, repeatable, and scalable processes to grow the business. And that's
Mhm.
often hard to come by. So
Right.
what have you found that works for your business?
So for us, we've tried a lot of different marketing tactics and a lot of different business development tactics. We found that the only ones that really are successful in the industry that we're in, because we're very niche, right? We're
Mhm,
incredibly niche. And the people that we're talking to are we can put in a list of like 200, 300 people. So these are not the kind of people that you want to send cold emails out to. It's like, hello, sir or ma'am. Like, when your list is that small, you're gonna remove all business opportunities before you even have one of them respond, right?
yeah.
So, um, one of our first steps was to actually understand like what makes these people tick, right? Because our while we are building stuff for Nike, we're building stuff for Mall of America, we're building stuff for Target. They're not our customers at the end of the day.
Mhm,
Our
mhm,
customers are going to be, as you brought up, the advertising and marketing people, right?
right.
They're going to be the ones who bring us in. Um, and so we really had to figure out what do they want. Well, mostly the people on the production side and the creative side, they want to be known for their thought leadership. They want to be known for the work that they've done. And
Mhm,
so a lot of the business development tactics that we use are all about building out trend reports, building out white papers, doing podcasts, any way that we can make our target client or our target prospects sort of the hero of their own story, right? So none of our marketing material ever talks about us.
hmm,
Sometimes it does, but if you look at our social medias, we're just that's not how we get business, right?
mhm,
Um, the way we get business is like this white paper that we put out recently, right? Called Data to Death. It's all about how do you use qualitative data in the creative process. So things
okay.
like feelings, intuition, things that aren't measured by hard numbers. Like how do you keep the human emotion in that creative process when you're designing an experience? Uh, and we interviewed a bunch of designers, creative directors, that sort of thing. Uh, we had like the head of creative from Google contribute. We've had some one of the head designers from American Airlines contribute. Uh, some really interesting topics came out of that. But to answer your question, uh, the hardest thing in a market that's incredibly niche with a handful of like people that hold the keys to the kingdom, it's about how do you get them on the phone, because these people are being bombarded on LinkedIn, they're being bombarded by cold emails, they're being bombarded by everything. And if you do the same thing everyone else is doing, they're going to ignore you, right? You're not special. So you need to figure out what do they want and then give that to them, and then they'll give you a conversation exchange. People talk about giving value all the time. Like, how do you give value? How do you give value? Right. Um, I don't like using that phrase just because it's very hand wavy and it's very ambiguous, right? It's very much like, oh yeah, sure, just do a value and they'll respond. But it really is about like, what do they want and what can you give them? Because it's a trade, right? They're trading their time, so you have to give them something back.
So one of the ways you build awareness for your business is you put out a white paper, the one you just mentioned as the most
Mhm.
recent example. So let's talk about that data in the creative process.
Yep.
Like we certainly work with creative firms. We do media buying, right? So it's the very boring parts of advertising. It's Excel documents and like cheeseball PowerPoint presentations and like
Very
data in
important.
class. Yeah, it's like but if you focus on if like you're just incrementally better than everyone else's PowerPoint, like you get a lot of like kudos for that.
Mhm.
But anyway, and like data and like platforms like the Trade Desk and Media Math, whatever the case is. How and so we often work with creative shops that are merging the data that we'll give them with the creative ideas that are part and parcel of their nature, of their DNA, of what they know how to
Mhm.
do really well. So what are some of the insights that you found in the white paper?
Well, everyone has a different opinion. That's one of the biggest ones, right? But
Okay.
that's to be expected with something like this, right? Is like when we're relying on like intuition and like your past experiences and how to translate that into data. Like everyone's going to have a different perspective there. But
Yeah.
there's a couple of common threads that we see sort of like underscore every response that we've gotten.
Mhm.
And the biggest one seems to be using intuition, experiences, and qualitative data not as a metric and more as a framework to construct a story, right?
Hmm.
So it's when you're thinking about, you know, something just doesn't feel right about the creative direction that you're doing, or this doesn't evoke the emotion that we're wanting to do, or
Mhm.
like maybe you do a small user group test and you see like, oh, people aren't responding to it, but you can't really get clear reasons why. Um, what you want to do is you want to use those reactions and those emotions and those feelings and those observations and those anecdotes, even though you can't put numbers to them, to create a narrative, right?
Mhm.
And then it's within that narrative where the other side of the coin, the quantitative data, the stuff that you can measure, starts to take shape, right? So qualitative data really only exists to contextualize quantitative data. They can't work alone. Either of them can't work alone. You need them
Right.
together.
Okay. So qualitative data works to contextualize quantitative data.
Yep. And that's
So the data go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, it was interesting is like that storytelling, that narrative piece that I mentioned. Um, these people that we interviewed for this, that we did these case studies on, like people from Google, American Airlines, Target, and all them, they did not know each other at all, and they all used the exact same language around creating a story and creating a narrative. So it was just so wild to me.
I like that phrase. I'm trying to well, I have a recording here, so I guess I can review the recording. So qualitative data contextualizes quantitative data. So
Mhm.
I think that's interesting, right? Like so like the data can take you in one direction, but if you're not feeling it, for lack of a better term, if you're not feeling it, if it doesn't jibe with the way you're kind of like thinking about it, you
Mhm.
it the white this white paper or these insights from all these creative experts would say go with your gut and let the data drive you to a point, but ultimately go with your gut and see if you're right. Like, is that a kind of another way of contextual understanding this idea?
Y- Yeah. uh, One of the quotes that came from the head of creative at Google that I thought was really interesting was he mentioned that in his process, sometimes he will run into a gut feeling or an intuition that he just has to chase. He can't explain why. He doesn't know why. But sometimes you just have to chase that to the end and see where it goes, right? And in a world of modern marketing where we're so obsessed with numbers, we're so obsessed with analytics and so obsessed with like, okay, what's the click-through rate here? What's this? What's the conversions here and all that?
Right.
Uh, Sometimes it's okay to kind of just like, you know what? I'm just gonna follow my intuition here because I think I have something, because that's where the big breakthroughs happen, right? But at the same time, you don't want to completely ignore the numbers, right? So like
Right.
if the numbers are telling you like, hey, you've been going down this road for a while and nothing's happening here, use that as your clue to sort of maybe try something different, right?
Right. There's a push and pull between when you look at the qualitative data, when you look at the quantitative data,
Mhm.
and neither one should be ignored. But there are different situations where one is more should be weighed higher than the other.
Right, right. It's and the most successful creative teams are the teams that know how to balance both.
Right.
And the most effective way to do that is being able to break down the barriers in communication and collaboration between everyone within your team, right? And I mean everyone, right? You want the art directors talking with the copywriters and sharing ideas with the engineers and sharing ideas with the biz dev people and sharing ideas with, everyone there has a different intuition. Everyone there has a different collection of experiences that's going to inform that qualitative perspective in a different way, right? And that's to be added on top of, you know, all of the market research that you're doing in regards to like, psychographics, demographics, like so on
Sure.
and so forth, right? It's all a mix. And your ability to sort of like connect the dots between all of them and create that narrative and then guide that narrative. Well, not just guide, but check that narrative against reality using the numbers that come back on the quantitative side. That's sort of the key to success, where people like Google and all them like really knock it out of the park.
Where can people download the white paper?
Yeah, so this one is the current active one. We have a blog where we're constantly talking about creative technology stuff called augmentedweekly.com.
I was
If
just
you go
about
to
to ask you about that.
yeah, it's augmentedweekly.com, and this particular one is report.augmentedweekly.com. So we do one of these every 6 weeks or quarter, depending on when the data comes back. And it's a full-on micro experience with an email capture at the end. Like we'll give you the report, but you got to give us your email. That's the trade. But yeah, report.augmentedweekly.com, all about qualitative data. It has a lot of quotes from some really interesting people, way smarter than me. So go check it out.
Well, so Augmented Weekly is your publication, like right? Is that right?
Yeah. Yep.
So tell us about how that came to be.
Yeah. So this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, right? Where it's we are the most successful whenever we can help communicate technical ideas to creative types, right? Since a lot of the people that we talk to, sort of in the marketing and advertising space, especially, uh, they could do incredible magic if they just knew what was possible. So the whole goal of Augmented Weekly, and it's still a fairly new initiative for us, so it's still sort of getting off the ground. But the whole goal is like, how can we take all of the craziness that you hear sort of in the tech space between a bunch of nerds talking between each other that you otherwise wouldn't know what the heck they're talking about, and pull out the most relevant pieces for what creatives ought to know, and then communicate that in a way that's like, hey, this is kind of what this does. This is where it's effective. Don't worry about these buzzwords. These things actually show promise, that sort of thing. Like, I'll give you an example, right? There was, I'm sure that being in the marketing and advertising space, you probably like keep up with like Adweek and
Yeah.
all them, right?
Yeah.
So Adweek, they will sometimes publish out articles from people who, write to them or pay for an article and be like, "Hey, I really want to promote this thing," and they'll just be like, "Okay," and they'll slide it through. There was one that came out a few weeks ago that was like, "Your brand needs an NFT," or something really silly like that. And your brand absolutely does not need an NFT, right?
Right.
And so the whole goal is like technology is incredibly important in the marketing and advertising space, but Adweek doesn't know how to talk about it, right? None of these current like marketing and advertising publications that exist right now talk about it at all, unless you're like paying them to promote an article. And
Right.
the ones that are paying to be promoted, they're going to be full of misinformation because it's someone trying to sell you something, right? And then even then, they're not even talking about the really cool stuff, right? So at South by Southwest this year, there was this startup that's like really gaining a lot of traction called Portal. And what it is it's essentially like a um, a hologram display, right? That
I've seen
looks,
this.
yeah, you've seen this,
I've seen this guy, these people on TikTok.
yeah, yeah. So if you were at
So
an
what?
advertising
So
and marketing
sorry.
company,
So what is it? Tell people what it is, because I'm actually not entirely sure what it is. You
oh,
can
okay,
explain.
yeah, yeah. It is essentially well, it's a box, right? But it creates the illusion of a hologram. It makes it look like there's someone actually there. One of the nice things about it is it's it's touchscreen. It has a huge field of view. It's not like a Pepper's Ghost effect where like you have to look at it in a very specific area.
Mhm.
Huge field of view, very interactive. You can stream real time, and it's essentially a more scalable and effective method at like giving that hologram illusion than you might have seen in the past. And one of the big advantages, as someone sort of in the either in the experiential marketing space or on the brand side, is this is a sort of off the shelf product that you can plug into a wider experience. And
Mhm.
sort of where we come in and where we're going to be talking about something like that is like, okay, sure, you can lease one from them or you can purchase one and just slap it down somewhere and call it good. Or you can take that tech and integrate it into a larger brand experience in combination with like the maybe like a ticket kiosk, for example, right? A lot of I feel like
Hmm.
a lot of like people on the advertising and marketing side just aren't thinking about like how do you take these pieces of tech that are new and
Mhm.
emerging and combine them and create experiences. Like where are they useful? How do you do that? And like where should you not be doing that? Right. Like I would much rather see creatives experimenting with stuff like that than investing several $100,000 into like an NFT project no one really cares about. So that's sort of the purpose of Augmented Weekly is to like how do we as creative technologists uh, sort of comb through this huge mess that we have in the technology area and sort of
Yeah.
surface the best to the top and then talk about it in ways that matter for people on the creative and production side.
Yeah, like I was just having a conversation with I think she was a media director at an agency or an agency owner, and one of the things she said about there's a similarity here, and I'll get to it, which is with media, when you're thinking about advertising, the effectiveness, one of the key things about knowing what works really well for advertising is you have to understand the tools and capabilities that exist in the marketplace. Like you got to know how Facebook ads work and how the trade desk works and how Google ads work, etc. If you know from a very macro level, you might know some things, but the functionality is what gets you to a point of where you understand how to make it work for a particular campaign. And I see the similarity there because it's like I think some of these, and I'm not in this world because I'm not thinking about these really interesting creative things. I'm thinking about data and optimization. But I think the challenge that you just expressed is that a lot of these people who are thinking about really creative endeavors don't know what can happen in the world, aren't thinking about the new technologies and how they can be deployed for their brands. So I think it's really interesting that you provide the know-how on how stuff works, and you have a depth of knowledge, and your team has a depth of knowledge about all the interesting technical things that exist in the marketplace, and then you pair that with a creative person from an agency, and then you guys together can synthesize something that wouldn't have come to fruition or even been thought about separately.
No, that's exactly it. And that's sort of like our whole model and that's why we exist, right? And to kind of tie it back into the to the data stuff that we were talking about earlier, right? The only way that you can make this work is if you truly understand what you're working with, what problems you're trying to solve, and what you're trying to build for the end customers, right? So having a very deep understanding of like, you know, qualitative data, how to gather it, how to use it, how to actually build a creative brief around it, and then how do you combine that with the quantitative data in a way that makes sense? That ultimately informs the stuff that we do with these creative directors. Because here's the thing, the stuff that we do is not cheap, right? Like
Right.
Mall of America and Nickelodeon Universe can only build a completely bespoke experiential kiosk for like $1 million once, right? You mess that up and like the
Yeah.
board's going to be very bad. So
Right.
making sure that like, because you mentioning you're on the data side, the stuff that y'all do on that side is like it lays the groundwork for anything that we do, either working with the agencies or on the engineering side to be successful, right?
So I think, have you thought about creating a newsletter? I feel like this is this marketplace is ripe for a newsletter. I see a lot of like
Mhm.
big, interesting, creative thinkers creating like subscription newsletters on like Substack or something like that. It feels like this would be the right place for that.
Yeah, so it's in development. We are
Yeah.
working on that newsletter right now, right? I mean, there's a reason we're gathering all these emails. We're not just going to hoard them and sit on them. Um, the publication, if you sign up for it, it will send you updates when we have articles out. But to your point, right? The landscape in this is changing so fast, and people do crazy stuff all the time, and the desire for the newsletter is definitely there. It's just a matter of like we gotta build it.
Is there and so as you look at the rest of this year or the next 12 months, is there anything of particular focus that you and your team are looking at?
um, just in terms of like creative projects, or do you mean like
Projects,
industry direction?
technologies, vision for the business? Like, where's your head at, basically?
I think that the industry that's going to be the most susceptible to these sort of like engaging spaces, like immersive tech, and where these advertising and marketing firms are going to make out like bandits, is going to be in the retail industry.
Hmm,
And the big reason behind that is there's a huge push right now for this idea called harmonized retail. So I'm not sure if you've heard the term omni-channel retail before.
yeah.
Uh,
I have, but
yeah,
talk about it.
this idea of omni-channel is just like you have an app, you have a website, you got to make sure you have multiple touch points for your customers and all that. Super retail specific. It's made by a bunch of people, in a boardroom who don't really understand customer experiences. Um, and so once you sort of get the creatives in who like have a better intuition for, what do people actually want, and you get those bigger advertising marketing companies in there who like, you know, uh, want to actually be involved in like leveraging technology in retail spaces. You end up seeing people don't like it whenever you just sort of force like an app or something on them, right? People want a more
Sure.
harmonious experience between like the environments that they're in and the stuff that they're engaging with. Um, and basically, the whole reason why I sort of bring this up is because uh, all of the majority of retail stores right now are completely like they're not exciting. There's nothing interesting there, right? Customer retention is gone. There's no such thing as customer loyalty anymore. There just isn't, right? The only way that retail can compete is either by crafting really nice, immersive, interesting experiences, or by being massive like Walmart. And if you're mid market, you're not going to be Walmart. You're not going to be Amazon. You're not going to be Target, right? Um, but you might be able to do something similar to what Nike's doing, right? You see those really cool like experiential Nike stores, that whole thing.
But they keep
Those
closing down.
ideas.
But they keep
What?
closing down. They keep closing down. Like, I'm in
Mhm,
LA, and like there's
mhm.
I don't know
S
where there's one. Maybe there might be one in Santa Monica, but like
Yeah.
the only retail place I really enjoy is Apple.
Mhm. Yeah, well,
And
they have essentially defined an incredibly, like, immersive experience for them, right? Like, they
yeah,
they aren't doing a whole lot in terms of, like, digital physical interaction, but it's one connected experience, it's one, single ecosystem, right? Um, the Nike stuff, it's interesting you bring that up because, the Nike stuff in the retail sector, like even though they open up and they close down, they are wildly successful whenever they do open. And the
really.
reason why they're opening and closing constantly like that is they're experimenting with new things. They're trying something and then seeing if it works, and then trying something else, and then trying something else, and then every single iteration builds on top of each other. They are very okay with moving fast and seeing what works and what doesn't and that sort of thing. And they've had a few that were complete hits, knocks out of the park, right? And there's a reason they have made a complete full transition away from like, being resold in other stores to being a sort of a direct to consumer brand now, right? They've actually pulled out of like 9 major retailers like within the past decade.
I
And
didn't realize that.
yeah, so that's why that's the success metric there, right? Their margins are bigger than it's ever been. Like their name is more recognized than it's ever been. They're associated with experiences over stores now. So like
Mm.
it's there. That's where it's going. Um, but all of that was informed by like, people on the data side, on the marketing side that were like, you know what? Sure, we can make, these conversions 0.01% faster, or we can make people love us. Like which which metric do we want to optimize, right?
Right. Wow, fascinating. So it's really a different type of thinking about marketing and business than I'm used to. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's a lot of like high risk, very bold plays, trying to be instead of like making small micro changes, like the stuff that we do is all about like how do you get out of the middle and try to become remarkable, you know?
Yeah. So Alex, tell us as we wrap up here. Tell us how people can find you if they want to work with you.
Yeah. So we're actually going through a bit of a rebranding right now, but right now the agency site is Wyrmix.com. So Wyrmix.com. But I would definitely suggest going to Augmentedweekly.com and
Mhm.
subscribing there for all of our creative technologist posts. That's probably going to be the best wealth of information for you. And
Nice.
if you want to see the latest report that we put out around the quantitative data, all of the case studies and all the interviews that we did, there's some really interesting people on there. It's report.augmentedweekly.com.
Awesome. Alex Melton, CEO and founder of Wyrmix, creative technology engineering studio based out of Dallas, Texas. Thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the LA Business Podcast. If you like what we're doing on this podcast, please consider subscribing on Apple or Google Play, leaving a 5-star review, and sharing with your friends. If you have any questions, comments, or recommendations for a guest you'd like to hear on this podcast, please email me, robert@brillmedia.co. Thank you. Have a fantastic day.